Good morning. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Good morning. In 1993, a standards body formalized the definition of an audio compression standard called MP3. And ultimately, that allowed many of us to take our music, previously stored on analog devices and analog formats, and it made music portable, and it broke music from the bundle of an album into the simplicity of a song. Those two consumer conveniences utterly decimated the recorded music business, lost more than 60% of its global recorded music revenue. And it was driven by a technology not created by the recorded music industry, but embraced wholeheartedly by consumers, putting them in control to determine where and how they listen to their music and enable them to share it. I think we're at a similar moment in television, where the DVR has unlocked the consumer potential to decide when and how you watch your programs. That's moved to various devices, where we can now decide where we watch our programs. And it's enabled at least some conversation, if not right, some sharing. The music industry went through a bunch of different phases during its eventual acceptance of this massive shift to consumers being in control. Its first one was denial. It went through sort of righteous indignation, eventually lawsuits. Soon after that, punitive economics in the partnerships it struck, and eventually acceptance and an investment in building a new business model around the single and the sharing of music. So I think the change is driven largely by changes in consumer behavior, and I think we're entering that phase, or have been for some time. And what we'd like to do is talk about, in what's clearly one of the golden ages of television, where we've never had a better slate of incredible high-quality programming looking so gorgeous on amazingly beautiful screens, how this notion of the consumer being in control and the pressure that perhaps the unbundling will, that is now upon us because of us looking at shows instead of networks. We have an incredible panel of some great people here today. You can read about them in your book. But I'd love for them to talk to you today about how this shift, largely taken by consumers' adoption of a technology not created by the traditional television industry, could impact one of the greatest business models ever created, network television. Rich, what's the impact of the DVR? This is Rich Greenfield, a media analyst at BTIG. I'm sure you all read him. What's the impact of the DVR and on-demand viewership of television on the traditional TV model?
Well, I think when you look at TV, what's interesting is that it's not just the DVR. There's really been a major move by content owners. So all of you sitting in the audience that sell programming, what's interesting is that traditionally television was only sold in a way that you could watch it with advertising. And you're seeing an increasing shift to content being made available earlier and earlier. You know, Netflix just doing a deal recently with Warner Brothers where you're gonna be able to watch shows that are, literally just a year old, being able to watch those on demand without commercials. And I think this whole concept of moving towards commercial-less television, or ad-less television, it started with the DVR, actually it started with the VCR. I think when you fast forward in time to what's happened with the DVR, and the DVRs have grown in size. So, I was just out in Kansas City seeing a Google Fiber DVR, which is 2 terabytes and has 8 tuners. And you can look at Hopper, which has brought the lawsuits that David was just kind of highlighting that we saw in the music industry starting to play out in the TV industry. We're seeing this bigger and bigger push towards being able to watch programming in a almost cinematic, like watching a movie format, where you don't watch it with ads and you watch episodes back to back, so-called binge viewing or marathon viewing. And I think as you get more and more used to it, you like it more and you actually enjoy it more. And while there is that water cooler element of, hey, what happened last night, people are more and more saying, like, don't tell me, I don't want to know about it. And they're actually enjoying large numbers of shows, either in groups or at the end of a season or even after a season. I was in London 2 weeks ago and someone was telling me how they watched 5 seasons of Breaking Bad on Netflix. And this was in some random person in the UK, and it was just nobody, this is a phenomenon not just playing out in the US, but it's worldwide, where consumers love to be empowered and love not watching advertising, which is one of the fundamental backbones of this entire industry, which that needs to evolve, and there's no clear answer on how it evolves.
On February 1st, when Netflix unveils a new series where they're going to put every episode out on demand, watch it any order, anytime, any device, Is that a watershed moment in the way content is released to consumers?
Well, it's probably a good question for Kevin, too, because he's going to have a show later in the year that's going to be in a similar format.
Kevin?
I think it is a watershed moment. I mean, Netflix really planted their flag by ordering 26 episodes on a format from the UK based on the auspices. It's a $100 million investment, roughly. I think it went up because the budget's gone up pretty significantly. And to do that tells the creative community, the people that I traffic with, that they're a serious player. And making all 13 available of season 1 in one day confirms what you were saying about the marathon viewing and the binge viewing. But it also changes the storytelling. And I was just having a conversation with Tommy Schlamme, who's a big director, producer, did The West Wing. And he was bemoaning the 6-act structure in network television, that every act out is a cliffhanger. It's got to drive you back after the ad. And of course, the notion of doing 13 in a row is maybe at the end of every episode, there's something that pushes you to next week, but you don't have to keep fighting to get viewers every 5 minutes. So the stories will change, and we found that in Orange is the New Black as well. The stories are very different, very non-episodic, and that will change. And they would be viewed on TV. It would be a kind of an odd experience with commercial breaks.
Do you think we get to a point where episodes are actually different lengths, like they tell whatever the story is versus being set to an
I mean,
hour?
look, in pay, you know, Curb Your Enthusiasm, which we bought in reruns on TV Guide Network, we were always scratching our head because one episode's 33 minutes, one's 25. It was just whatever Larry turned in that week. And nobody said, make it 26. So I think you're right about that. It'll be what the story demands.
Chet, is commercial viewing going away for television programming?
You know, if you look at Nielsen claims it's not, right? But the reality is I've never watched a commercial if I've DVR'd anything, and you know, my wife won't even watch on demand, a show on demand, unless it's DVR'd because ad skipping is disabled. I think the issue really is relevance, right? People like commercials, that's not a problem. People buy products, that's not a problem. Ad-supported TV has good, solid foundation, but the current format, the abuse that's gone on to the system just incents people to, you know, take paths that skip that.
Well, since Aereo's product enables DVR essentially for all viewing all the time, right? What kind of viewership changes do you see, since you don't need to depend on Nielsen's view of DVR activity? People skip ads?
You know, we haven't gone into sort of looking at data yet, but I mean, the patterns are as obvious as you think. Anything that is not a quote-unquote live sporting news special event, it's DVR'd. It's consumed, you know, for us, Sunday is the big DVR night, which is strange.
Right.
So it's in either between football games or after football games, and you know, people, it's 100%.
Alex, Netflix, or excuse me, YouTube has, I think, pioneered one of the most fascinating new forms of video advertising. Can you talk a little bit about TrueView and how you think that impacts television advertising?
Yeah. Well, Kevin was referring to the idea of control for the creator and the opportunity to bypass the pilot system, which has punished so much great content over the decades. And you were talking about viewer control, and we see that notion of viewers being in control of their experience extending beyond the ability to build your own channel guide or to determine what you watch when, but also to control the advertising experience. And TrueView is a skippable ad format that allows for viewers to determine whether they want to watch beyond the 5 seconds they have to. And if they don't, advertisers don't pay, and if they do, advertisers do pay. And it really solves a lot of the friction equation associated with both monetizing content, which we all have to do, and allowing those consumers an elegant experience. We're motivated to make sure our algorithmic signals surface the most relevant ads to a viewer, to encourage them to see the advertising as content in their eyes. You know, I was thinking about about NATPE and about content first, the message of content first, and I think that's exactly right. This is a content versus a television gathering. But I also think viewer first is probably a direction that we're now heading in.
And
David,
go ahead, Betsy.
isn't a question to ask, do content creators care about advertising? And I certainly think in the news and information space, because there was that long separation of church and state. So content creators in news and information were not supposed to care about advertising, and you had to be very, very careful over the years in broadcast news and cable news that you weren't thought to be influenced by advertisers. And as a result, content creators sort of say, it's not my problem. And one thing that we've done at the Blaze TV, because we're independent and because we care very deeply about our advertising, and my boss Glenn Beck cares very deeply about the advertisers that support the network, is start to think about those new models where you can incorporate that advertising message in the news and information space. We know it's been done a lot in the entertainment space with product placement, into the body of the content in a way that lets the user know, hey, these folks are paying us, this is an advertisement, but isn't in this discrete 30-second spot.
Let's talk a little bit about this. Go ahead.
Yeah, let me just jump in. And I completely agree with that. And an extension of that idea is that the line between content and advertising is blurring and is increasingly going to blur. If somebody's going to be...
Great advertising is content.
Great. If somebody's going to potentially be skipping an ad, you're going to be motivated to create advertising that looks and feels like content. And I challenge anyone to reflect back on Red Bull Stratos, watched by 8 million concurrent viewers on YouTube and 8 million on Discovery Channel, and think about whether that's content or advertising. So we see that as a huge...
Got to turn the phone off.
Somebody's disagreeing. We see that as a huge shift and a huge motivator in how brands think about creative communication going forward.
Well, I just wanted to follow up because you made a comment about, do people care about advertising, or how do people think about advertising? And one of the challenges is in a content-first world, you can find lots of great content that isn't new. And I think that's the real change that we've seen. And whether it's YouTube is a great example of the long tail. You can look at Netflix, but the ability to find programming, remember, most people never watch. I mean, anyone who's in this audience here, most of your content is never watched by most people in the US, let alone around the world. And so the ability to take great programming and surface it. I think one of the more popular shows on Netflix right now for kids is actually an Australian TV show about mermaids that no one in the US had ever seen and was actually bought very cheaply. I forget the name of it, H2O or something. But the point being is that there's lots of great television that you can actually watch on demand without commercials that's taking up your time that you would have been watching commercials. And so there's just this shift of where what is live is now being replaced by stuff that isn't even just recorded on a DVR, but may have aired 5 or 10 years ago or aired in another market.
Chet's observed that there's really been some fundamental change, or at least a threat of change, to all layers of the television stack, the traditional television stack. We just talked for a while here about viewership and consumption changes, different devices, on demand, skipping of TV ads. Content and programming changes. Kevin, I'd like to talk a little bit more about that, how the new distributors, if you will, on the scene, Netflix, Amazon, et cetera, are maybe changing not just the economics, but the definition of content and programming, and also monetization and business model changes. But I'd like to ask about how distribution, traditional content distribution, is being impacted by a couple of the new ways to market. And I think both Betsy and Chet could address a little bit about that.
So we're in a really amazing and interesting and I think unusual position in the television space and in the subscriber space. So the Blaze TV started on the internet. We have 300,000 people paying $10 a month. That's been widely reported. And we have in the last 6 months, 9 months, pursued cable distribution. And Dish carries the Blaze TV now, and more MSOs will carry Blaze going forward. What's been really interesting is I think from Glenn's perspective and the company's perspective, the consumer absolutely comes first. So his mindset and the company's mindset in going into this world of distribution was, I want to be where the consumer is. And if there's a bunch of those consumers and they are on their devices, whether it's an iPhone or an iPad or through the web, we want to reach them. And if there's a bunch of folks that are still viewing or interested in our content through traditional means, we want to reach them. And it's a different, because we are a brand new channel, we're we're completely independent. Glenn has complete creative control over the channel. We have that sort of freedom not to be stuck by old models or old gatekeepers or outside investors that are saying, no, 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 you got to do it this way, you got to do it that way. And it just opens your mind to looking at the business differently and really looking at it through the consumer's eyes. And I want to say one thing before Chet answers the question as well. And Chet can obviously speak to this more specifically. A business that you used to run was about real-time viewership, looking at real-time viewership in the cable business, right? And that is so fascinating, right? Because if you're a content creator, you don't care, you shouldn't be caring about how much that MSO is going to pay you. You should be caring, I mean, obviously you do if you're ESPN and getting $5 a month, but you should be caring about who's watching your network. I mean, Current TV who watched Current TV? They were getting such small numbers watching that audience. That revenue was purely driven on cable distribution. It wasn't driven on what the consumer wanted at all. I think the consumer voted they didn't want Current TV.
We approach it very much as a consumer-centric viewpoint as well, and not just as well. That's sort of the only exclusive focus we tend to use. And it's interesting, when cable, the model started, there was a great model. It was addressing a great need, which is there was a lack of programming. There was access technology was problematic. Picture wasn't clear enough. All of those things. Cable comes in, launches a bunch of new stuff, serves its purpose. It was great. But I think that just got taken so far away from what, we used to look at this data, and it was like, 7, 8 channels max is what people really sort of watched. And a lot of financial analysts say, well, those 7, 8 channels are different. Well, they're not. They're, the 5 of them are the same for everybody, and maybe there are 2 or 3. But as you think about the creation of these libraries online, and I think the Netflix example and all these other things that are happening, I think it's fantastic for the consumer. I think that to me is what is driving. We wouldn't be doing what we're doing if the additional content wasn't available in libraries, right? Because broadcast only represents a segment of the population. So we look at it and say, to me, there are 2 big problems. Number one, the dial is just too darn crowded. You can't find anything. And as much as if you're a new product, you can't get on, right? So simplify it and make it cost effective, right? Make the value commensurate with what the time spent is. You talk to a 25-year-old, and then we every now and then do surveys. We asked one question, how much time do you spend on Facebook? And one response was, depends who I'm stalking. Could be the entire day. and I think Cuban made the same point, right? I mean, these are all attention grabbers. Your time's getting fragmented. So what you used to have 4 or 5 hours, now you have 30 minutes for. And there's no way you can justify the amount of complication and price that comes with that.
There's also a big difference, and I think everyone on this panel somewhat speaks to it, is that we're in an era of the personalization of media, not just TV, but of personalization of media. And when you sit down, when you sit in front of the television and you were presented with, okay, here are the hundreds of channels that you could watch. Now you sit down and, it's not the whole family sitting down to watch The Cosby Show. It's, mom on her iPad watching, or a mom on the television watching whatever she's watching. It's kid watching YouTube. It's other, dad watching the NFL on the iPad on the Time Warner cable app, and it's someone else watching, Netflix. And it's that personalization of these devices that everyone is getting. I mean, tablets are starting to go like this. Smartphones are over 50%. Everything is becoming a screen. And in that personalized world, the ability to access media, search and discovery, and the ability to find what you want to watch, kind of the whole framework for how video works. And you're also competing with, and I think the comment you made about time is interesting, because you're also juxtaposing video watching next to Angry Birds, next to Skype, next to all these different forms of entertainment that don't fit the traditional def. Even communications fits into that world now. It's not just we sit down and we watch whatever's on the TV and you flip through the channels. Now you have kind of essentially limitless choice. I mean, I think YouTube is a great example of limitless choice.
It feels like there's significant different pressure being placed on the model of delivering television through a cable bundle, right? We have networks breaking into shows, networks a bundle of shows, that being unbundled. We have cable, a bundle of networks, and we have the sports rights, cost increases driving massive, soon to come, price increases to the consumer of the cable bundle. does that break? I mean, it feels like pressure from all dimensions. And where do you see the evidence? Where do you look for evidence of that?
I mean, I look at the median subscription age as a pretty interesting indicator. It's gone up to 29 or 30, somewhere in that range, which is a huge indicator to me. I mean, I don't talk to anybody under the age of 30 who says, oh yeah, I mean, yeah, of course, they're the diehard ESPN consumers that they have that, but people are really changing their habits. So I look at the median subscription age as an indicator. I look at, you know, relative acceptance of penetration of broadband. I always think of it as, you know, I think you said MP3, the format was created. I take it one step forward and I look at the bandwidth. If you have a megabit, music's going to get disrupted. You got 10 megabits or 15, video's going to get disrupted because this is just too darn simple after that.
Yeah. Alex, I want to talk a little bit about YouTube's efforts around content. Could you describe a little bit of the channel strategy, talk a little bit about how you view content, and I'll give you some provocative question. Is YouTube the farm team for traditional television, or is it going to compete for viewers with traditional television?
Yeah, I think it can be the farm system for any content creator, and proudly so. But equally, there are audience fan bases on YouTube for shows that some of us in this room will never have heard of. I compete with my 14-year-old for YouTube consumption in my household. My habits include bad lip reading. There's a genius show featuring some NFL bad lip reading. Epic rap battles of history. I don't know if any of you guys have seen Moses versus Santa Claus, but highly amusing. Neil Patrick Harris has a show called Neil's Puppet Dreams on the Nerdist, where he dreams in puppets. There are shows that are extraordinary that come from creative communities that are very personal to their fan bases. And if they can connect with authenticity and relevance, then they'll be incredibly popular. You know, we made a decision about a year and a half ago to try to solve the discovery challenge that, that presents itself on YouTube. When you have 72 hours of content uploaded every 60 seconds, our Achilles heel is getting viewers to the content that they can love as quickly as possible. So, so we created channels on YouTube, and we decided to double down on that and provide a structure where content creators could extract the maximum value from the audiences that, that found the content that they loved. And through the free subscription mechanism, allow those audiences to come back again and again, and hopefully find content that they would love again. So that is how we see the world, and in many cases, the content community that can live in this world is, runs the gamut. There are, as I said, shows and channels that some people in this room haven't heard of, but are absolutely enormous. And equally, there are TV brands, shows, and networks that that are huge on YouTube as well. So we can very much coexist with the television business. We help drive ratings for Fremantle, for all of their talent shows, because they embrace Content ID. Content ID is a rights management tool that allows content owners to block or allow content from fans that is owned by the rights holder to be uploaded onto YouTube, which allows for American Idol and X Factor and Family Feud and Got Talent to be virally shared by fans around the world, and by doing so become free marketing and incremental monetization for that show owner. Jimmy Kimmel and Ellen on the talk side leverage all of the fan community and the uploads that they encourage fans to surface so that they can convert that into broadcast content. So yes, we can be a farm system. Disney have got a fantastic audience network on YouTube, and they're halfway through a season of Swampy. Swampy's an alligator from a a mobile phone app called Where's My Water, and you know, it's halfway through its first season. It's brand new IP. Disney's very keen on seeing how it will resonate with consumers, and you know, it's 20 million views and growing. So where they take that show, whether it remains within a YouTube ecosystem or extends into other forms of development, is up to them.
Kevin, when Lionsgate's got a lot of really interesting conversations and partnerships with the new kids on the block.
Yep.
Netflix, YouTube perhaps, Amazon, maybe Microsoft. You can talk a little bit, Apple, talk a little bit about that for us. And in particular, are there some fine lines you need to walk when you choose to be a content supplier to one of the new kids versus your previous one?
I mean, as a supplier right now, you referenced the golden age of television, and it really is, because there's so much variety, so many places to sell. When I started in this business, there was 4 networks that you could pitch to, and syndication, and occasionally a cable company. And over the years, we've, for better or for worse, we've kind of been the first studio in to supply newer networks, and along the way redefine them. So Weeds was a big move for Showtime, which had not really been too much in the series business. Mad Men really put AMC on the map as a scripted home and originals. And so we kind of go out of our way to find these. So with Orange is the New Black, which is a drama coming on Netflix, we wanted to do the same thing. But it was a very quick sale and then like a 9-month deal process. Like it was based on a best-selling nonfiction book. We sold it in the room conceptually, and then our COO, Sandra Stern, and myself, and those guys all had to look each other in the room. How do we even do this deal? You don't even know what do reruns off of Netflix look like? We wound up structuring it in a way that is very typical, conventional in some ways, but in other ways not. Obviously, they take a super long term and they run it forever and ever, which is atypical of TV. They have some foreign territories that weren't, when we made the deal, weren't in play. And by the time we finished negotiating the deal, it was like, oh, wait, Benelux. Oh, great, Benelux. What are we going to do in Benelux? And every single one, we're structuring a deal right now with Hulu on an original, and it's the same kind of thing. So it's been kind of 2 shows, make the show and make the deal. It's almost 2 different productions. But when they're in place, I think it will move much faster because you'll have a template. We're in partnership with YouTube as well, with BFit, which is through our home entertainment and fitness division, which is a really robust business that isn't talked about a lot. But we're on the lookout, and I think Microsoft, I think whatever Nancy is going to do there is going to be compelling, and at some point, maybe, Apple's going to use some of that billions in cash and just say, why don't we make some of our own stuff?
Looking forward 3-5 years from now, what percentage of a television production company or studio's show revenue will come from the new entrants versus the traditional?
It could easily be, because we're smaller, we're a little more boutique, very different than a Warner's or a 20th, which is still primarily broadcast focused, easing their way into cable. And these newer models would be, at the moment, incrementally not interesting to them, probably. Like, it's more of a headache. They can't take 9 months to make that deal. That's just taking their eye off the ball. But it could easily be half of what we do if you think of all those places and the amount of shows that they say they're going to make. It could easily be half of our revenue.
But when you look at the amount of content that's flowing to things like Netflix, and we were talking about Hulu before, and there's so many new outlets for programming, is there any way that you can conceive that traditional broadcast television viewership can go anywhere but down?
Well, I think it's going to evolve. I think we've seen it over the years. Reality television, it was a panacea for the cost issue at first, and then because so much of it is on the broadcast side is competition and live, you have to watch it then. You've seen what sports programming is doing. It's kept NBC relevant through a really fallow period until their other stuff caught up with it. I think they're just going to proliferate, and I think you're going to see in broadcast primarily sports, live reality, and a handful of super signature shows like Modern Family that can aggregate that mass audience at the time and in DVR, because it still delivers a huge punch, and that cable and these new players will continue to be the home of kind of what you'd call, I say, auteur television, that really high-end, the Downton Abbeys, the Breaking Bads, the Mad Men's of the world, that people will find and aggressively seek out wherever they can. And that'll probably be the ecosystem where it shakes out, I think, in 3 to 5 years. Betsy,
There's been a lot of talk about traditional print media dissolving from the Uber publishers as brands to the journalists and the personalities as brands. You work for a company that's built around a brand, an individual personality as brand. Are we going to see more of that? Will there be more on over-the-top IP-delivered video programming, brands built around personalities?
Oh, absolutely. You know, I work now for a living brand. I used to work for another living brand at the Huffington Post when I worked with Ariana. I think what's amazing about those living brands, and we can use Oprah as an example or Martha Stewart as an example, is that their strength and their relevance to certain audiences bring along other programming and other brands and other content. And sometimes that's done very successfully, and sometimes that's done less successfully. You can certainly argue with Oprah and all of the stars that she made stars, you know, from Dr. Phil on down the list. She brought a lot of fantastic brands into her ecosystem and made those brands fantastic brands. What we're trying to do with Blaze TV is a really sort of interesting kind of acceleration of all of that, in that we own this network, right? So Oprah now owns a network, but when she had her television show in syndication is probably when she should have owned a network. So we own this network, and you know, we brought the team of Vince Vaughn and Peter Billingsley and their production companies with us to create a really cool reality show, Finding the Next Great American Documentary. That's programming that people would say, wow, is that really in Glenn Beck's wheelhouse? That's outside of his core wheelhouse. We have a kids television show called Liberty Treehouse that comes on before Glenn's show at 5 o'clock that has a lot to do with American history and science for middle school and high school kids. All this interesting content around this guy who resonates with a certain audience. And what's interesting is all of that content isn't Me Too content, right? That's not, Liberty Treehouse is not reinforcing Glenn Beck or the Glenn Beck brand. What we're doing with Vince and Peter is not a Me Too Glenn Beck television, or it's not, you know, Glenn Beck light in any way, but it's around this certain audience and set of values and set of interests. And I think living brands are enormously powerful. It's easy to take that message and go viral. It's easy for people to sort of gravitate around that person and their set of ideas and be interested in other programming around that. We've seen that, again, we've seen that with Oprah. We saw that, you know, years before with Martha Stewart.
But imagine if Oprah had started her own Glenn Beck network, and if Glenn has 300,000 people at $10 a month, how much could have Oprah had generated? You know, she went through hundreds, you know, significant losses. Discovery's going to will it to now be successful. They've got the sub fees high enough. They've had some breakthrough, you know, they got things like the Lance Armstrong that have put them over the top, and they're going to get to profitability next year. But you wonder, could they have been instantly profitable with a complete control model where they own and controlled everything in the world of either YouTube or online, the way Glenn has done with Major League Baseball's advanced media platform? It's just like this interesting idea, and you're seeing, you know, like Jerry Seinfeld, instead of creating for his next show for NBC, Jerry created for Crackle, and as well as for YouTube. And you know, to me, it's just interesting how people are nervous to kind of rock the boat on the traditional system because there's big paychecks in the traditional system, but you're starting to see early signs, and I think Glenn is certainly the trailblazer in setting what is a really interesting model and showing that it's profitable and that you can even upstream it. I mean, you should talk that, you know, they're just launching on cable now, you know, being an actual cable channel as well as being online.
Right, so it speaks to, you know, what Rich is talking to speaks to the real sort of importance and value in kind of sequencing those businesses. So when we went to, when we launched the internet channel, the subscriber service, a lot of people said, well, that's kind of crazy. Glenn's really in demand. He's left Fox News. You get any cable network to pay Glenn a lot of money to have a show on another network. But we didn't want to do that. We wanted to build our own network. We wanted to have creative control. We wanted wanted to go directly to an audience that we knew, that loved us, that we loved. We wanted to connect to them directly. We wanted to understand what they were interested in. And we played and have played and will continue to play very, very successfully in that space. And then a decision was made, wow, you know, the cable business is not broken. There are still tremendous dollars out there in the cable space. That's a great way to distribute to our audience. And you know, there we started with the Dish deal, and you know, if you've heard Joe Clayton at Dish talk about Glenn and the programming, you know, it's programming that very much resonates with that audience. But again, I think following those conventional paths is going to get you conventional dollars, right? Chet's a great example of that. Following a really unconventional path that is hard and nasty and messy, right? Could have, you know, has so much more potential and so much more upside. But you know, that's a hard set of decisions to make.
I mean, our objective is to create a new ecosystem. So that's it's not the focus isn't just build a small niche business, but to really create a new ecosystem, because. You know, I look at that as saying the historical packaging of technology distribution and aggregation, and in some cases production as well, creates a disincentive for any innovation along those. And if you could start going at a couple of different layers, you can recast it into a different, I mean, we think of it as 5, 10, 15, I don't know when it is, but there will be a time where you will go to a destination online to get any and all content you want, as opposed to, and that'll include live, right? As opposed to being told, here's the stack, take it as is.
Yeah, right. I've got a couple more questions for this group. We've got about 8 minutes left. If anyone has a burning question, there are some people with microphones out there, and feel free to jump in. In the meantime, I want to ask about the new ecosystem. You know, in the internet ecosystem, there's a significant amount of data at play, and a lot of decisions about advertising dollars, about mindshare, are made based on actual data. The TV ecosystem has some areas that are very rational, and decisions are based on a lot of rational data. Advertising, who watched it, you know, give me some viewer data. Now, granted that, you know, may contradict DVR data, but it's, you know, it's panel-based, but nevertheless, there's some rational decision making. You talked about the Oprah, that suddenly the O network is going to be profitable. It's going to be profitable not because there's a whole bunch more people suddenly watching it, putting aside the Lance thing, because the pre-negotiated rate increase from a penny a sub a month to 50 cents a sub a month, irrespective of the number of people watching it, kicked in. I mean, that's, sure. So does the new ecosystem is it more rational? Does it make more sense? Look,
the cable network model is still extremely profitable. I mean, if you can get a fully distributed cable network with a reasonable sub fee, with 100 million homes having cable television, it's a phenomenal model. And even if Chet's product is, you know, starts to roll out, there's still going to be, you know, 80, 90 million people with traditional multi-channel television. That isn't going anywhere quickly. I mean, I don't lose sleep at night about the collapse of the multi-channel model. I mean, I think there was a lot of fear 2 years ago that cord cutting and everyone would just go Netflix and Hulu, and that would be the end of the multi-channel model. And the reality is, a multi-channel model is very sticky. People like sports. People like watching. TV is not a bad value. I mean,
great product.
TV, you watch 5 hours a day in America per person for $70. That's, you know, it's not a lot of money that you're paying in your cable bill for television. The experience isn't great, and I think the challenge is now in this fragmenting world that, you know, Alex is certainly helping facilitate, and Kevin with producing content now for Netflix. The fragmentation means that, you know, eyeballs are going to be more fragmented, and so ratings is really what to me seems challenged, and therefore advertising. And I just think in this DVR on-demand world, the question is, how does the model evolve? Because advertising, even for cable, is still a very big percentage of the profitability. Maybe not for OWN right now, but for most of basic cable, it is. You know, leave ESPN aside, but advertising is still the driver of basic cable profitability. What happens to that model when, you know, the realization that, you know, Nielsen, whether you want to say they lie or they just distort the truth, the reality is people aren't watching advertising on their DVR, they're fast forwarding through it. I mean, I don't think anyone sits there with the DVR button going, I am not going to fast forward, I want to make sure that the networks get paid. You know, I mean, it's comical, but yet Nielsen says that 50% of people with DVRs watch live television. We know that's not true. I mean, maybe you're staring at your phone going this while the ad's playing because you just don't bother to actually fast forward, but you're not actually sitting there refusing to use the button to make sure that people in this audience get paid.
But Rich, the cycle is sort of an interesting one, right? Ratings decline, affiliate fees have to go up because these are all public companies, and that'll cause further pressure on the bill. Ratings decline further. Further affiliate increases. So, I mean, it's, at some point, the heuristics are going to be interesting to watch.
It breaks. I mean, the system breaks.
I'm not sure if it breaks or it kind of hits this, like, who cares, because everything interesting is happening elsewhere anyways, kind of and you know, it's the landline problem, right? Huge dying curve. There's probably still people out there that are buying leased telephones from AT&T, but it's a huge dying curve.
Great. Got a question over here.
Yeah, thanks, David. Great conversation. I'm Randall Rothenberg, the CEO of the IEB. Rod already referenced, we're taking over the stewardship of the digital content new fronts in the spring, the upfront marketplace for original digital video content at scale. So we're pretty heavily invested in this. But there is one problem that Alex already referenced, and I'd really love your opinions on, and that's the discovery problem. If we're now going to introduce, honestly, another several thousand new branded channels into the networks, into the world of video content, how are people going to find their ways to it? What does the electronic program guide of the near future look like? What will the discovery process look like? How big of a challenge is it? And who's overcoming it?
Yeah. Isn't this social? Isn't that the answer?
Well, I think the first is that EPG looks deeply personal. It's no longer 200, 500, 1,000 generic channels that you have to pour through. It is your channel guide. And that has a huge resonance across our platform, at least. On top of that, you have a challenge that, well, you have a deep ability to connect with a consumer who's very, very specific to your brand that you're trying to communicate with, and I think that's a huge value. But one consideration that hasn't surfaced yet that I want to bring up is that prime time is prime time. When people are using their iPads, the use case is not, or their phones, the use case for watching video is not in a bus stop in the rain in London. It's at home, over Wi-Fi, between 6 o'clock and 9 o'clock at night. So the key consideration for shows and channels on whatever screen is, how do you make sure that what you've got is going to work across all of these different screen types? Because that degree of control will be going away. It'll be their personalized channel guide that they'll be determining what to watch from. And they'll be able to, I mean, we announced at CES a partnership with a host of OEM partners to be able to find a show on your mobile, on your iPad or on your phone, and fling it to your television. And so the ability to extend that mobile experience, which up until now you contained to mobile, it now transfers into that living room seamlessly.
20 seconds each. 20 seconds each. What's the most important, most dramatic thing that will happen to traditional television this year?
The most important thing that happened to traditional television this year. I mean, look, I think we saw the beginning of it last year, which was the decline in overall viewership of TV. So people watching less TV. I think that was an inflection point, and I think that what you're going to see is that traditional ad-supported live television continues to fall at an accelerating rate. I think you're going to see that in 13, just because there's just too much else competing with it in either non-live or in on-demand programming.
Betsy?
I think that in the news and information space, I think coming out of the election, the 2012 election, you've seen Fox News and MSNBC go back to their camps and continue to argue and yell and scream with their very, very specific audiences. I think you're going to see the emergence of, we'll see what Jeff does at CNN. We'll see what we continue to do at Blaze TV, the emergence of an audience, news and information audience that does not want to be part of that yelling and screaming, that wants to be part of a different type of dialogue in that space.
Chet?
I think we continue to win.
in 3 seconds. 17 left, nothing else.
A generation of under 35s who are starting to create an online video habit, turning it into a daily habit through mobile consumption.
I think they will eliminate the Live Plus 3 and move to the Live Plus 7 this year, by the end of the year is my guess, because this fall was the tipping point on DVR usage. That for broadcast will be the biggest thing that happens this year.
And I'd say that for the sort of under 25-year-old, the realization that this is the first screen, not the second screen, that the primary consumption for television happens through non-big screen TV. Thank you, everyone, for doing an amazing panel. I thought you did a great job.
Thank you.